Hey guys, Nicole here with Obscure Reptiles and Caging, and today we're going to be going over everything you need to know if you're thinking about breeding rodents. So let's get started. Hey guys, so today's video we are going to be talking about breeding rodents. So we're mostly going to be using the example of you are a snake breeder and you are going to be breeding rodents in at least high-ish quantity in higher volume, because let's say you have 10 ball pythons or 20 snakes, something like that. I personally think it's best to breed your own and have a few different local places who also breed as well that you have access to. People all the time contact me saying that they're looking for a place to get rodents. They've already collected, let's say, 30, 40 animals. They've got all these snakes, and the person who bred rodents no longer does, and now they have no food for their animals. So that's why I like to be self-sufficient, or at least majority of my animals. I do, again, have a few places. For example, I like to breed rats. I do not breed mice and ASF, so I have people who breed both of those. If you get picky snakes, like ball pythons can be, you want to have a good variety for that animal. So in this video, we are going to break down pricing, setups, best places to get things like their bedding, several little things that you guys may not have thought of, and I'm going to try to give you guys information that's not in other videos so you guys can be as well informed as possible before deciding to breed. Alright guys, so number one, if you are going to breed any kind of rodent, make sure that you're not allergic to them. I do know several people who are actually allergic to rats specifically, and if you decide, okay, let's go get 40 rats to try to breed them, and then you have a bad allergic reaction, you have to get rid of them very quickly, it's a lot of wasted time and effort and even money. So make sure that you're not allergic if you are deciding to breed these animals. Next is you're going to want to pick what species you want to keep. For example, ball pythons, I breed rats. They're larger. It's easier to breed, let's say, 10 rats instead of having to have like 15 or 20 mice. I do not like the smell of mice, so I do not breed them, but I do have people who I know locally who do. That way, if I have, again, picky babies, they still have different food options, and this way I'm able to pretty much supply myself for a majority of my feeder needs. Let's say you have a smaller species, like you have like colubrids, you have a corn snake, you have something small, something like mice or ASF rats can work very well for you. For those of you who don't know, this is a ASF rat, so what it stands for is African soft-furred rodent, or African soft-furred rat. So the benefit of these guys is the fact that they really don't smell, almost at all. So for every time you're going to be cleaning a rat or a mouse, you really only have to clean the ASFs, let's say once a week, maybe every 10 days. When it comes to things like mice and rats, depending on how much ventilation, where you're keeping them, you might have to clean them every, let's say, 3 or 4 days or 5 to 7 days. So you may be able to get away with cleaning the ASFs a little bit less, and they also like to go to the bathroom in one area. So you can spot clean, and that'll get you to that 7 or 10 days and not have to clean as often, especially if you're spot cleaning the one area that they like to go to the bathroom. The downside to ASFs is they stay small like mice, which is a downside if you have bigger species. If you have like boas, you've got ball pythons, you have something that's a little bit on the bigger side, and your feeders are only getting this big as adults, you'll need a lot more of them. So they are nice to have, especially if you have smaller species or if you only have 1 or 2 snakes. But another negative is a lot of them like to chew a lot. You can keep them in rack systems, but all the ones I have ever had love to chew, so they chew out of most things. So you can keep them in a glass tank. Make sure it's something large so you still have good ventilation. Make sure it's a screened lid. And it's easier just to start out with a glass hanging water bottle instead of getting plastic that they could chew through. Then it makes a mess and you have to get more. So if you just go with glass on glass, they can't chew through it, and it makes it a little bit easier when keeping them. We've all seen white mice. You can do mice as well. Again, it stays on the smaller side. Everyone knows what a mouse looks like, but personally I don't like the way that they smell, so I do not keep them. Now, if you're buying from somebody locally, it's great and awesome until that person, for example, decides not to breed anymore. They don't have enough to supply you, and then you're kind of stuck looking for rats, mice, whatever you're using in a hurry. So it's always nice to at least mostly supply yourself, and that way you don't have to rely on other people. Let's say you want to start breeding your own rats. So if you've never seen it, this is an example of a rodent rack. You can build them yourselves. Some people buy them. We used to build them before wood prices went crazy. But to get a rack, it all kind of depends on the price where you are. I've seen them range from like $250 to $350, and that's normally one that's about 6 tall. You use mortar mixing tubs for them to actually live in, screen on top so they can eat through any pellets that you put on top or the food source. But you're looking at about $250 to $350 per setup, and that's just for the rack itself. You're then going to have to purchase the animals if you're looking, for example, already established breeders. Normally they're $15 to $20, and that gets you normally 1 male and 2 to 3 females. You can also start off with getting a bunch of smalls from somebody and then picking out the ones you want and growing them up as well, but it will take a few weeks to a few months to start production. Now for the substrate for these guys, you can use a bunch of different things. The most cost-effective one is aspen. You can get it at Tractor Supply because it's kiln dried. It's very important to make sure that there's no bugs or parasites inside of that. So that is a great thing to be able to use. It's only like $6 or $7 per bag, and that bag will go a long way. It's a pretty large bag actually. And a little trick is you can also get these little pellets right here. There's different brands, but this one's the one at Tractor Supply. If you put a layer of these down first, they really help absorb the urine smell, and that can keep the smell of your rodent room down a little bit more. There are lots of different rodent foods depending on where you live. Again, at Tractor Supply, there's different feed stores. You can get it online at reptile shows. I've seen some people use dog food, which I wouldn't really recommend because you want your rodents to be as healthy as possible because you are going to be feeding your collection, your animals, and all of your reptiles with it. I always recommend a good higher protein rodent food. The bags of food, normally they're about, you get 25 pounds or even 50-pound bags, and those are going to run you $35 to $55, sometimes more, sometimes less, depending on where you're located. A great thing to think about also is where you're going to be putting these animals. Do you have space in your reptile room? Are you going to be building a shed outside? Do you have space in an attic, in a basement? Are you going to be putting them in a garage? Make sure wherever you're putting them, it has heat or air conditioning, or at least cool, because these guys are not very good at keeping themselves cool. Again, above 80, 85, they tend to not want to produce, and anything below 60 to 55 degrees, again, they don't really like to produce because they're really more just focused on thriving and surviving than actually producing babies. So make sure that they're good climate, make sure that they have good airflow. These guys can smell. You can do things like filters. You can get like carbon-based filtration systems. You can get a lot of airflow with windows or doors. But remember that the urine smell from these guys is going to sink down low. Especially if these guys, for example, are outside somewhere, make sure you have good vents and stuff that are down low to help get that urine smell out of the room. And you're going to want to make sure you're cleaning these because if they get too dirty, you're going to get upper respiratory infections, eye infections, and that's not good for the animals. We want even our feeders to be cared for super properly and have a great life, even if they're going to be used for food. You can still provide them with adequate living and food. You can also give them different types of human food like crackers or noodles. You can give them vegetables, fruits, all depending on the time of the year, but you can give them a lot of different things, enrichment, stuff like that, and that's a really good practice even for our feeders. Remember that even if you clean these guys all the time, they do have a smell to them. I find mice smell the most, then rats, and then ASF are the least. But if you, for example, are putting them in your basement by your furnace and your furnace kicks on, that could pull the smell upstairs. So really put a lot of thought into a great place to house these guys that has, again, good climate control or good ventilation, good filter system, and also one that is escape-proof. A big thing you're going to have to remember is if you, for example, have these outside in a garage, in a shed, you're going to be attracting wild rodents to come in for the food, for the females, for everything that you have in that room. So you're going to get things that are trying to chew their way in, and once in a while you will get animals that chew out of bins or escape in your own room. They're going to be trying to get their way out. So make sure that this is escape proof. If you get a wild rodent into your reptile room, then they could have things like rodent lice, ear mites, a whole bunch of stuff that they could actually transfer to your animals. So make sure you have a really good, secure location for these animals. Another thing you might want to look into is you could get cages like this, little traps, and if you lose a rat, like let's say when you're cleaning, one hops out, you can catch them. You can use things like snap traps, but the whole point of these is to breed them. Investing in a little trap like that so you can catch any that have gotten loose is a really good thing to have. You could just put a little bit of food in there and put it along one of your walls so anything that gets loose will go into that cage eventually. Something extra for you guys to consider, depending on how many rodents you're going to be having, what are you going to be doing with all that extra waste? Because for us, we actually had to purchase a second garbage can, and we have to pay a yearly fee to have 2 garbage cans out at the road instead of 1, just so we have extra space. If we had a larger house, we had some acres, it would be great to be able to do composting or things like that, but unfortunately with the setup that we have now, we had to get another garbage can, so that's something for you guys to think about. So for a rough estimate price-wise, if you are getting a 6-level rodent rack, you're paying $250 to $350 just out the door to buy the rack itself, which let's say comes with a watering system. Then you're spending, let's say, $15 per drawer to be able to fill it. You're going to want to keep 1 or 2 open. That way you have overflow for your babies that are your grow out. So let's say you're doing $15 times 4. So we're going with an additional $60 just to get breeders to be able to fill 4 drawers, leave 2 empty for your male and female grow outs. Add that on top of the price for the rack, and that's your starter fee. And if you're going with cleaning them every 5 to 7 days, you're probably going to be going through 1 bag of that bedding. Let's call that 1 a month. So that's only about $6 or $7. Now let's say you've got 1 rack system, or let's say you wanted 2 or 3 now that you guys know the startup price to be able to have 1. Let's say those 4 bins we have full of breeders has 3 females in each. That means you have 12 females. So if every month they're producing at least a moderate amount, let's say 10 babies per mom, and you pull those babies when they're just over 5 weeks to put in the overflow, you might not be able to keep up with your full 20 snakes right away, but that could really decrease the price or the amount of animals that you have to get from somebody else. Obviously, the more rodents you keep, the less you're going to have to buy from other people, but it's not a bad idea to make friends with people who, let's say he has mice, she has ASF, I have rats, and you guys can all work together. That way, when one of you needs something, you all have access to it, or find a local pet store that has one, or anything like that. One last tip is if you don't have very many snakes, and let's say you want to keep a bunch of rodents, make sure you have a plan for what you're going to do with those extra. Do you have somebody who's going to buy them all from you? Are you going to make a CO2 chamber to be able to freeze and euthanize them humanely? Do you have extra freezer space? Are you going to buy a chest freezer for all these overflow? Make sure you're thinking about all of these things before you jump right in and start breeding. But I think breeding your own rodents is one of the smartest things you can do if you've got a decent sized snake collection. Alright guys, that's it for this video. If you have any questions, you can put them in the comments below. If you haven't already, please subscribe. We do new videos every Wednesday, and I'll see you guys next Wednesday.